Welcome to the Compass 2.0 tutorial. My name is Brad, and today we will discuss the first page you come to when opening a panel in the panel editor, and that is the partition page. The first thing you will notice at the top is the general information section, and this contains the description of the partition, such as P1 for partition 1. It also includes the name of your partition, such as lobby, if this is the lobby partition, or maybe it's the cash office. This name will display on all screens that have a reference to partitions. If you're doing keypad programming, this is found by going to menu mode in programming by pressing pound 93 and then pressing 0 twice for no until you get to the alpha programming section. Keypad programming will be discussed in another video. Next, you have the primary subscriber number. This is grayed out because you can't change the primary account number here, but you have to do it on the customer panel screen, which we did when we added this panel. If you need to edit this, you can simply go back to that window, and then under Customer Options, click on Detail, and you can edit the account number there. Next, you have the secondary subscriber number. If you have one, you can add it here. Most of the times, this will be left at all Fs, which means it's empty. The Alpha 1 and Alpha 2 is what will display on the keypad when the partition is disarmed. Alpha 1 is typically used for the name of the company or store. So if you were working at Acme Supermarkets, you might put here Acme store number 001, for instance. Or if this is the cash room partition, you might simply just mirror the name of the partition itself and put cash office. Each keypad will be assigned to a partition, so each keypad will display what is put here for each partition. Under System Options, we have the entry and exit delays. You have 2 entries and 2 exits that can be programmed. So in zone programming, when you assign an entry-exit point, you can set it to entry-exit 1 or entry-exit 2, and that zone will follow the timing that is set here. Prevent Zone Bypass will do exactly that. It will prevent the selected zone from being bypassed by the user. It will also prevent a zone from being force-armed or bypassed if it is event zone. So I should probably clarify what those are. Normally, when you go to arm the system, if a zone is tripped, say a door is open, then the system won't let you arm it until you close the door or bypass that zone. But if you have force arm enabled for that zone, the zone is automatically bypassed if it is still faulted by the end of the timeout countdown. Event zone, on the other hand, is typically a window. If the window is opened, you can allow the system to still force arm and the zone will be bypassed, but if you later close that window, then it will become unbypassed and armed. Then if the window is opened again, it will trigger an alarm. This is more typical of a residential application where the homeowner will be home while the perimeter is armed, but there may be applications in a commercial or industrial setting. So just remember that if you prevent zone bypass on a zone, it should not be a vent zone or a force-armed zone. Quick arming. This allows you to arm the system without using your 4-digit user code. For example, to arm this way, simply press the pound key and the number 2 to arm. This would not likely be used in a commercial, industrial, or government setting, because without a user code being entered, there's no way to monitor who armed the system. It should be noted that a user code will still be required to disarm the system, though. Multiple alarms per arming. This allows more than one alarm on a given zone during an armed period. However, multiple alarm soundings will not occur more frequently than allowed by the programmed alarm sounder duration. This section is local only and does not affect the number of communications reported to the central station. We want to refer to swinger suppression below to limit communication messages. Permanent keypad backlight is self-explanatory. Normally the keypad only lights up when a button is pressed and it remains lit for a short duration, but this will keep the backlight on at all times. Random timers allows randomization of pre-programmed time-driven events for each partition. These time-driven events are found under the Schedule tab and then under Time-driven events. If this is checked, then an event that is scheduled for, say, 6:15 a.m. will start at 6:15 on the first time the event is fired, but thereafter it will be at random intervals within 30 minutes of the first set time, so between 6:15 and 6:45. This is most useful for home applications where a family goes on vacation and you want to trigger relays to turn on and off the lights. But this could also be used in commercial applications if the need arises. Quick exit. Normally, to arm the system, you have to type in your 4-digit code plus 2 for away. But say instead of pressing 2 for away, you use 3 for stay mode. This will only arm the perimeter. If this were, say, a supermarket, they might use this to arm the perimeter at night when stocking shelves. No interior zones will be affected, such as motion sensors. Now, if quick arming has been checked, then when the system is armed in stay mode, the user can simply enter their code plus 2 when they're ready to leave, and this will start the countdown. Otherwise, the user would have to enter their code plus 1 to turn off the system, then rearm the system by using their user code plus 2 to rearm. So having this checked, it simply removes a step. Allow goto from other partitions. So say you're at a keypad on partition 2, but you want to access partition 4. If this is checked in partition 2 settings here, then you will be able to access partition 4 from this keypad by pressing the user code plus star plus the partition number. Now keep in mind that the user code must have permissions set for it to access this partition that you're trying to go to. And this will be discussed in another video when discussing programming users. But after 30 seconds or more of no key presses, the keypad will return to its originally assigned partition. So in our example, it would return to partition 2. Zone bypass after disarm. Normally when you put in your 4-digit user code plus 1, which is the off key, it will both disarm the system if it is armed and or clear all bypass zones. If this is checked, then any zones that were bypassed when arming this system will remain bypassed when you disarm. Now, in order to clear bypass zones with this checked, you'll need to enter an additional user code plus 1 to clear any bypass zones after you've already disarmed. Under Display for other partitions, here we can select what will display on this partition's keypad. If we don't want fire alarms to display that are triggered by zones on another partition, we would leave this unchecked. If we want to display burglary and panic alarms for all other partitions, we would check this box. And if we want to display troubles from the other partitions on this display, we would check this box. So if we are at keypad 1 on partition 1, and we want to see troubles from all the other partitions displayed on this keypad, then we would check this box. Communication options. Swinger suppression count is a global feature for the panel, and it's applicable to all zones. If an entry-exit zone is violated, then it reports an alarm to the central station. To prevent false alarms, the panel avoids reporting alarms to the central station based on the number of swings configured. The panel ignores any movement for the specified count, and if the movement exceeds the swinger count, then the alarm is reported. For example, this is good if you have a loose door that occasionally moves slightly due to air movement and causes false alarms. Cancel report after disarm. If enabled, cancel reports are sent when the system is disarmed after an alarm, regardless of how much time has gone by. If disabled, cancel reports are sent within the bell timeout period only. Note that this option must be enabled so cancel reports are always sent. This field must also be enabled for SIA installations. SIA is the Security Industry Association. It sets standards for to prevent false alarms and other industry standards. Burglary alarm communication delay. If this is checked, it allows the maximum time that can be allowed before a burglary alarm is reported. It should be noted that for commercial burglary installations, this should be set to 0. That way there is no delay and all reports are sent immediately. Under dialer reports, Panic Zone 995, 996, 999, this just enables reporting for those panic zones. The Panic Duress allows for reporting on the Duress Zone 992. And in order for this to work, you have to make sure that there's a non-zero report code for Zone 992. So if we go into the Zones page, and we scroll down to Zone 992, you want to make sure that there is a number in the report code. Now, by default, there's a 6 here, but it has to be just any non-zero number to report if you're using Contact ID as your reporting format. Just as an FYI, when you're using Contact ID, which is the most common format, on a Vista panel, the report code entry, it doesn't really matter what the number is, because as long as it's non-zero, Vista will send the correct codes in CID format. But when you're using other types of formats, then you actually have to use the correct report code here. So typically, most applications, you're going to be using Contact ID. So any non-zero number will work here, and that applies to all zones. So when it comes to report codes when we get into zone programming, you'll notice that in order to enable a zone, it just has to have a non-zero number in the report code. It can be any non-zero number. And we'll cover that later in the next video when we talk about the dialer and how to set your report format. And now under macro key assignment, these are your A through D keys that are on the left side of your keypad on the 6160, the 6150, and other keypads. These are set by default to be the panics that we just discussed, but they can be custom programmed to do other tasks. And the way to program them is we go over to the Common Data tab over here. Then under the macro descriptors and definitions, we can put up to 10 characters for a description of the macro. So, for instance, say we wanted to make a macro that would bypass Zone 4. We would put in the description something like BYP4, something meaningful like that. Then under the definition, we would put the keys that we would normally press on the keypad to bypass the zone. So if you're working on a keypad, you would typically bypass the zone by putting in your code, your 4-digit user code, and then you push the number 6, and then you push your 3-digit zone number. So in this case, it would be your 4-digit code plus 6 plus 004 for zone 4. That's what you would do if you were working on the keypad. Well, here we don't put in the code, but we do put in a 6, and then we'll put in our 3-digit zone number, 004. So our definition would look like this, 6004. Now there's no reason for us to put in the code because as you'll see later, I'll explain it a little bit more later, but it will actually prompt us for the codes when we push the definition keys or our macro keys. But I'll explain that in a minute. So say we want to do another macro here, and this macro will perform the go-to command to, let's say, go to partition 5. So we would put in the description something like go to 5. Then in the definition, we assume the code has been entered, and then we would put an asterisk or a star, and then the number 5. Because on a keypad, that's how we would go to partition 5. We'd put our code in, and then star and 5. And that will take us to partition 5. So that's all you're doing here is you're in the definitions, you're just putting what you would normally type in on the keypad, with the exception of the user code. So now we want to go back to the partition tab, and we're going to assign our macros to a key. And remember, we have the keys on the keypad A through D. So we're going to make our assignments here. On the A key, we select the first macro from the drop-down box. And as you can see, it has a description there, so you know what you're assigning it. And we do the same for the B key. Now, when the user wants to bypass zone 4, all they have to do is press the A key on the keypad, and it will prompt them for their user code because the command they've requested requires authorized permission. Or if they want to go to partition 5, they can hit the B key and go through the same process. Now you can also do combinations. So let's go back to the Common Data tab. And now on the third macro, we will do something a bit more complex. So say we want to go to partition 2. So we put in a star 2. Then we want to bypass zones 10 and 11. So now we put a space between commands. And then we put a 6 for bypass. And now there's no need to put a space because this is all part of the bypass command. So we next put our 3-digit zones 010 and 011. And it should be noted that this is a Vista 128. On a Vista 20, it would be only 2-digit zones, so no leading 0. Now we want to arm in the maximum mode. And so this is a new command. So we want to put a space, and then 4 for our max. If you look at the keypad, you see the number 4 is the max command, and 6 is bypass, just in case you're lost as to why I'm putting these numbers in. So now we want to return to partition 1, so we can put another space, and then star 1, and that's it. Now we can give this command something somewhat meaningful description, such as BYP on 2 max. And remember, you're limited to 10 characters here in the description. Now, it should be also noted that you can only enter into up to 32 keystrokes on the macro definition for a Vista 128, and only 16 keystrokes for a Vista 20. So now, if we go back to the Partitions tab, we can assign the C key to our bypass on 2 max macro. So when we do this now, if the user presses the C key remember what's going to happen is it's going to take us from partition 1 to partition 2. It's going to bypass zones 10 and 11, and then it's going to arm in the maximum mode, and then it's going to bring this keypad back to partition 1. So that's what will happen if they press that C key. And of course, this is something that's going to prompt them for their user code, because it requires authorization to perform these commands. Okay, so now down below here you'll see 3 checkboxes, and these just enable or disable the functions above. So if, for instance, if we don't want the keys to be enabled, we can just select 0 for all of the keys, and then make sure that all 3 of these checkboxes are unchecked. And now if the user presses one of the A through D keys on the keypad, nothing will happen. And now we come to the sounder options. The first is the confirmation of arming ding. Now basically what this does is produces a chirp on the bell output at the end of the exit delay. The purpose for this is, say that the manager of a store has just armed their system and walks out of the building and locks up. As they're heading back to their car, they can expect to hear a chirp when the exit delay is ended, letting them know that the system is now armed and they can drive away. If they don't hear this chirp on the external speaker or sounder, they know something went wrong with the arming process, and they can go back in and check and see what happened. Chime on external siren is for when the chime is turned on. So if you look at the keypad, you're going to see a button called chime. It's on button 9. So to turn on chime, you would put your user code in plus the 9, and you would do the same to turn it off. User code 9 turns it toggles on and off. Now this acts like a doorbell, so anytime an entry-exit zone is faulted, the keypad will chime. And normally it's just the keypad that will chime for that partition. But if you check this checkbox, it will also chime on the external siren. Sounder timeout is how many minutes the bell output will sound until it is turned off. This is to keep from annoying neighbors. If the alarms were going off constantly and no one shuts them off for hours, this would be very annoying. But this doesn't stop the reporting to the central station. It just simply stops the sounder from screaming. Reports will continue to be sent until the alarm is canceled. Console enunciation during exit just means to let the keypad beep as it counts down the exit delay. And it will increase in frequency as the timer enters the last 10 seconds of the exit delay. And now we're nearing the end of this tutorial, so the last thing we need to discuss is adding partitions and what is common lobby. So to add a partition, it's as easy as clicking the partition, add partition up here. On a Vista 128, we can add up to 8 partitions. Now, once we've added a partition, we can click on that partition and see all the same settings that we've just discussed. One thing to note, the primary subscriber number is missing. This is so you can have different account numbers for each partition. You would need this if you have different tenants in a building, but they share the same system. Otherwise, you can make this the same as the first account number on partition 1. But now there's one more thing we need to discuss, and that's setting up a common lobby. So to add a common lobby, we need to click on the Common Data tab as we did before. And from here we can select from the drop box which partition we want to assign as a common lobby, if any. So let's do that. We'll select partition 1 as our common lobby. And now you see a few more options come up. We can now assign the relationship of our common lobby to the remaining partitions. So before I get into that, let me explain what a common lobby is. Say you have a commercial building that has multiple tenants in it. Perhaps there is a law firm in one section of the building and an architectural firm in another. And when you enter the building, you have a common lobby between the two businesses. And on the left is the architect, and on the right is the law firm. Now, how do we set up an alarm system to accompany both of these companies who may have different hours of operation? It would be inconvenient for each of them at the end of the day to go over to their neighbor and see if anyone's still there, to know whether or not they need to arm the lobby when leaving the building. This is where a common lobby setup comes in handy. Now we can put a keypad in the main lobby and make it global so that it has access to all the partitions. And then it doesn't matter who arrives first or who is the last to leave. When, say, the architect arrives first, he will enter his code +1 to turn off the system. The keypad will now prompt him for what partitions he wants to disarm. He will say 1 and 2. This will disarm both partition 1 and 2 because 1 is set up as the common lobby and 2 is his office. He doesn't have permission for 3, so he can't disarm the law office even if he wanted to. If at the end of the day he goes to leave and tries to arm 1 and 2, and say the lawyer is still in his office, then the system will arm 2, but it will not arm 1, which is the common lobby, because 3, the law office, is still unarmed. And then, when the lawyer leaves and tries to arm 1 and 3, it will arm both, because 2 is already armed. So, in this kind of a setup, it may be also helpful to either put separate keypads on each side of the office, as well as in the main keypad in the lobby. Or we could even put a light above each office door, and this light can be controlled by a relay that turns on and off when that partition is armed. So, and this is important because the main keypad will be on partition 1, and so it will only show what is happening with partition 1, such as if you arm the partition, it will show that it's armed. But if it's if partition 2 is armed and the common lobby is not, it will show at the keypad that it's disarmed because partition 1, which is what that keypad is on, is disarmed. So the only way to get it to display the other partitions is to use the goto command, and that can be a bit awkward. So it's a good practice to either use multiple keypads, which is probably the most common way to do it, or you can, I have done this before, is set up LED lights that are beside or above the door that turn on if that partition is armed, and then they know for sure that when they left, they armed that particular partition. And this will be discussed more when we get into the relays page and discussing programming relays, and I'll explain how relays work. Okay, so now that we've discussed a scenario, let's show how to program it. In order to program a system like that, we have already selected 1 as the common lobby. So the next thing we need to do is check the checkboxes for partitions 2 and 3. We want the partitions to affect the lobby, and this means that the lobby can't be armed until this partition is armed. And we could also check arms lobby. This will attempt to arm the lobby if we arm this partition. Of course, it will be unsuccessful if the other partitions that also affect the lobby are not already armed or being armed. If that is the case, it will only arm the selected partition, but not the lobby. Now, for the final things that we will discuss is the subcategories under each partition. You will notice it lists zones, devices, users, weekly schedule, and temporary schedule. These, for the most part, are not editable here. For example, zones are edited on the zone page and are not partition specific there. But under this page, it only displays the zones that are already programmed for this partition. We can compare partition 1 to partition 2. Looking at zones under partition 1, we see the default zones that are pre-programmed for this partition. If we switch over to partition 2 zones, we see it is empty. And there's no way to edit those here. Now we have to go to the zones page down here to edit the zones.
Okay, so over here, this is where you would select what partition the zone is going to be on. And we'll put this on partition 2. And then when we go back up here to the partitions page and look under partition 2 and zones, you see that that zone shows up here. So number 1. And it's no longer under partition 1. Zone 1 is missing. Only shows zone 2 through 10 there, or more.
Now, the schedules, on the other hand, can be edited here. But we will discuss scheduling on a different video. For now, this will conclude this tutorial, and on the next video we will discuss the dialer page. And then at the end of this series, I will walk you through a typical programming setup. We will program everything, including a dialer as a primary with cell backup, a few zones including hardwired, wireless, and polling loop zones, and then relays for lighting controls, multiple partitions, and more. So we'll get into that in the future, but this concludes this partition page tutorial.